Start recording. So, the subject tonight is an article I posted, which is called "When is a Man Allowed to Divorce His Wife?" And it deals really, I would say, principally with, well, it's a Jewish article. It's not dealing with the laws under the state of California or any other state. And it begins with a discussion of biblical law and gets into rabbinic law. And as I sometimes like to do before I begin, just reading the article, ask you what you think Judaism has to say about divorce. Maybe we.
May I?
Yeah, of course.
I think that if we were to look at the reform movement, I would say that they've got good thinking on it. If I would look at the Orthodox or even the conservative movement, I think they are completely wrong with.
In what way are they wrong?
Well, why you have to go in front of 3 rabbis to get a Jewish divorce?
Oh, okay. So that's a halachic question. If you're dealing with a Jewish legal matter, you need to have a beit din, which is 3 rabbis. For a conversion, you need 3 rabbis. For a wedding, you need 2 witnesses. That's just a matter of Jewish law. And we'll get into the difference between Orthodox, conservative, and Reform with regard to a Jewish divorce. But yes, that's a reasonable question, Jerry. You're muted, Jerry.
According to what I've studied, a man can divorce a woman if he finds her disagreeable. Either she looks bad, smells bad, acts bad. I mean, it's basically he could have any reason he wants.
Yeah. So we're gonna see the details on that. Yes. Okay, Alan.
You're still focusing on the man can, as opposed to either party can, right? We're still staying with the traditional, the man can.
I'm just asking for your impressions.
Oh, okay.
And
so
reaction.
I obviously feel that the historical basis is based on the patriarchal base of the Bible. So that's why we have that, why we have it today. Well, we don't all have it, but some Orthodox do. But I just want to comment on Jay's thing about the 3 rabbis. One of the things I learned in marriage counseling is consistent with the 3 rabbis, even though he wasn't Jewish, is that his job as a marriage counselor is to help people stay married. Okay, so if they make it inconvenient by having 3 rabbis, Jay, that would be my comment.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
The argument is to make sure that you really need to be divorced or separate. And so even though it's man focused, which I obviously don't like, but the having the requirement in there is consistent with marriage counseling that I experienced, even though the end result was not a success, so he has to mark his own score down. No, it's not his fault. It's not anybody's fault. The point is, the rabbi's thing reminded me about how counselors try to work with couples today.
Yeah, and I don't know whether the job of the beit din is to try and get the parties to work it out. I actually don't know. I've been on many batei din, but never one relating to divorce. Bryce.
I've spoken to several marriage counselors in my life and asked about the process, and having been involved in it as well. The majority opinion, the majority attitude is not to keep people married. The majority attitude is to try to make sure that if the couple can repair their relationship, that they do so, but it's to make sure that the individual people are happier or happy, and to help them make their own decision It's not to manipulate them into doing one or the other.
Right, right.
It's to help them make a decision about whether or not they want to remain married and what would make them both happiest.
Yeah, and again, again, we're talking about it from a Jewish perspective. I don't think it's the job of the Beit Din to do that. Cheryl.
Yes, to what Bryce is saying, because I don't tell people what to do, but clearly a lot of people who come to me should be divorced.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
am I correct that you're not?
They do not belong together. They are miserable. Some of them actually love being miserable together and driving each other wacko.
Yes.
They really do. They get off on the yelling and the screaming and the fighting. But, I also see a lot of people where if you think you're changing the drug addict, the alcoholic, and, oh, they're going to change. No, it doesn't happen.
Yep.
And so patients will come to me at the hospital and they'll say, I don't understand it, doctor. I just got served with divorce papers with my wife because she's, she said I was unfaithful, but we've been married 45 years and I've never been faithful. Why now? I said, gee whiz.
Are you writing a book, Cheryl? This sounds like a great opportunity.
Not to inject too much levity into this, but there's the old joke about the couple married so long, and when asked by the judge why now, they were saying they were waiting for the children to die. So before we get into the article, I just want to point out something which I find sort of interesting, is that in the Hebrew Bible, there is no mention of the technique or the steps you go through to marry. Marriage is mentioned actually 7 times in the Bible. That's one of the reasons the bride circles the groom 7 times. And as we've discussed, sometimes ad nauseum, 7 is a magic number in Judaism. But there is no mention of any kind of ceremony or anything about what constitutes and what you have to do to have a marriage. It's typically stated as when a man takes a woman. And the word woman, isha, also is understood to mean wife. Whereas, as we'll see, divorce is actually mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. And then, of course, the details are going to be worked out in the Talmud. And there is an entire tractate of Talmud called Gittin. I think many of you may know that the Hebrew word for divorce is get. And I think there's even a discussion in this article about the origin of that word. And so there's an entire tractate of Talmud called Gittin, which is just the plural of get. Erwin.
I would like to know if there in the Bible marriage that never mentioned, the circumstances. Where did the ketubah comes from? The legality of the ketubah.
Oh, the ketubah is all Talmudic, and there is
I see.
And there's an entire tractate in the Talmud called Ketuvim, which is about the ketubah and actually many other subjects related to marriage. Yeah, very good question. Okay, so I'm going to go to share screen. That's not the way to do it. Share screen. And here we go. And I presume we can see it. Yep. Okay, good. So this is from what is becoming one of my favorite sources for these kinds of articles, Torah.com. When is a man allowed to divorce his wife? And I'll read the introduction. Deuteronomy's description of the circumstances of divorce is ambiguous. Thus, the Mishnah, and you can see it's Mishnah Gittin. So there's a tractate of Mishnah, and then, of course, the commentaries on the Mishnah is Talmud. So there's also Gittin is both a section of Mishnah and Talmud. Thus, the Mishnah records 3 different opinions on when a man is allowed to divorce his wife. What can we infer from the biblical text? And actually is a kind of a photo, or I mean an art rendering of a rabbinic court meeting for divorce. And I think I can blow this up a little more. So
Can I see the picture again?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, so,
So I guess those are the three rabbis.
okay,
And then
but,
here's a scribe, because there's I can't remember. I was actually doing some reading about the actual get, the bill of divorce, and there's a lot of detail about that it has to be newly written, and even how it's written and so on. In other words, you can't get a form and you can't go on get.com. I don't know if that even exists. Whereas in the Ketubas, you can buy forms, you can go to a Judaica store, but a get has to be written by a scribe. So there's the woman and her children, and
yeah,
there's I presume that's her husband, three rabbis and a scribe.
okay.
Okay, so would someone like to read divorce in Deuteronomy? Henry, would you like to read?
I would love to.
Okay, thank
Thanks
you.
for asking. Most of what we know about divorce in biblical Israel comes from Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4, which prohibits a man from remarrying his ex-wife after she has been married to another man. Although this passage does not legislate how divorce is to be enacted, the descriptions of divorce embedded in it shed light on the norms in Israel at the time when it was written. If a man takes a wife and possesses her, and she fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious about her, and he writes her a bill.
Did I just foul that up for you? I'm getting ready.
Yeah,
Sorry.
writes a
Okay.
bill of
Oh, sorry.
divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. She leaves his house and becomes the wife of another man. Then this latter man rejects her, writes her a bill of divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house.
So I want to interrupt it. I jumped to Safaria because they left out actually a critical. Oh, this is not the one. This is Deuteronomy 24, 1 to 4. Okay. I got to go back up to 24. Okay. Can we see Safaria now? Deuteronomy?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So what they left out was actually was pretty important. It says then the latter man rejects her. So a man takes a woman as his wife, becomes her husband. She fails to please him, and again we're going to get into this language in detail because he finds something obnoxious about her. And he writes her a bill of divorcement and hands it to her, sends her away from his house. She leaves his house, and then she becomes the wife of another man. So again, compare this, and we'll get into Christian thought on this, and certainly Catholic tradition on this, which doesn't allow divorce. But then the second guy rejects her, writes her a bill of divorcement, and hands it to her and sends her away from the household. Or the man dies who had last taken her as his wife. So husband number two either divorces her or dies. Then the first husband who divorced her shall not take her into his household to become his wife again, since she has been defiled. We'll get into some of this language, for that would be abhorrent to Adonai. You must not bring sin upon the land that your God Adonai is giving you as a heritage. I think it's almost a typo that they didn't put the full text that they need for the discussion, as you will see in there. I want to take a quick look at what's in.
Question.
Yes.
According to what we're reading here, so the man decides to divorce his wife and he writes her a dismissal.
He writes her, it's a bill of divorcement, which is a sefer karitut, which karet means to be cut off, and a sefer karitut literally means a book or a document of being cut off. They don't use the term get.
So
go ahead.
My question from this is, they don't have to go to a court.
Oh, so everything related. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting this again. I'm trying to follow up on Cheryl's fill in your own get. Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, so everything related to rabbis, courts, all that stuff is not in the Bible, Jay. It's all Talmudic.
Okay.
So, but so as I often will say is Judaism finds its seeds in the Bible. So divorce is mentioned here, but how you do it, what the bill of divorcement is, do you need 2 witnesses? Do you need 3 rabbis? You know, that's all going to be in the Talmud.
It's like the Constitution. The Constitution sets out broad things, but you've got to go through, and the bureaucrats have to write all the laws out and pass everything through Congress. So that's kind of how it is, I guess.
Yeah, so in a broad sense, absolutely. But there are many things that are not even mentioned in the Bible that become the heart of Judaism, such as group prayer, such as being in a synagogue and praying. That is not mentioned even once in the Hebrew Bible. And of course, it's the heart of practicing Judaism. Erwin, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I would like to ask you a question that concerning if the the husband wants to get rid of her, but if she doesn't find another man, is the husband, if he has a brother, he is responsible for her? Because if the husband dies, the brother is responsible for the
No, so
widow.
you're actually referring to something different, which is levirate marriage, which is if
Yeah,
a couple is married, not divorced,
yeah.
and the husband dies and they don't have any children, she is obligated to marry his brother, unless they go through a ceremony that rejects that option. But that doesn't pertain to divorce.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so so now we're going to talk about the things that come out of what we just read. So Henry, if you'd like to continue, several features.
Okay, several features of divorce stand out from this passage. The divorce is initiated by the man. The woman is not depicted as having a say in the matter. This seems to have been the norm throughout the ancient Near East. The man enacts the divorce by giving the woman a bill of divorcement.
Which
Number
is, as
3.
I mentioned, Sefer Keritut. Okay.
Number 3, the law
Sorry.
also informs us of the motivations for the 2 divorces, which are described in 2 different ways. The first man divorces his wife because she fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious, literally the nakedness of something or a matter of nakedness about
So
her.
let me just comment. The Hebrew is ervat dever. As you may know, in Leviticus, there's a whole long discussion. Basically, Leviticus 18 describes prohibited sexual unions, and the euphemism for a sexual union is uncovering nakedness, and it's actually a whole interesting discussion. But that phrase is actually used here in Deuteronomy, ervat devar. Okay, and now the second man.
The second man divorces her because he rejects or dislikes her.
And it's usneta, and it uses the term which, in I will see, I think in the article, it's a modern Hebrew term for hatred. But we'll see some more discussion of the etymology of this.
In describing the motivations for the divorces, the text offers some insight into the circumstances under which a man could divorce his wife, but the descriptions are not entirely clear and have been subject to different interpretations.
So
Philo
first one's
and
the first one, yeah. The first one's gonna be Philo and Josephus. Yeah, the time
Josephus?
frames are there. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Philo and Josephus, divorce for any reason. Philo of Alexandria, 25 BCE to 60 CE, and Josephus, 37 to 100 CE, summarized this law in their writings, both suggesting that a man could divorce his wife for any reason. Philo's summary begins, if a woman having been divorced from her husband under any pretense whatever, special laws 3 and 30 through 21, who's that? Somebody's translation there.
Yeah, I guess yes.
Similar, Josephus writes, he that desires to be divorced from his wife for any cause whatsoever, and many such causes happen among men. Antiquities of the Jews.
Yeah, and my guess is Josephus is probably writing in Latin and Philo is writing in Greek.
Okay. The New Testament, restricting the grounds for divorce. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:31 through 32, refers to the law in Deuteronomy. Jesus says, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
And let me just comment here. Actually, let's read a little more about one more paragraph and then I'll comment.
Okay. As elsewhere in this portion of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus cites a law from the Torah and then offers a more stringent teaching, namely that a man may divorce his wife only on the ground of unchastity. Implicitly, Jesus seems to understand the verse in Deuteronomy, much as Philo and Josephus understand it, as allowing for divorce on any grounds. It is only Jesus' new teaching that restricts divorce to this specific circumstance.
And I want to jump down to footnote number 6, which is also interesting, which actually is quoting from the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew. You have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. So Gale, in his commentary on Matthew, compares this entire section of the Sermon on the Mount, called the antitheses, to the rabbinic principle of making a fence around the Torah. So this, I'm going to try and jump back up. Yeah. So this is, well, I'll call on Alan first and then I'll comment. Go ahead.
So I never had this connection, but the statement you just read from the Christian Bible connects with the Jimmy Carter story.
Oh, of course, yes. But the interesting thing is what Jesus is doing is very rabbinic. I attended this wonderful series of lectures about the historical Jesus, and basically Jesus' time is a time of great debate about what Jewish law should be. And in certain ways, Jesus is much more liberal about Jewish law. So, for example, he relaxes. Well, I don't know if Jesus does this or Paul does it, but Jesus certainly is not strict on things like kashrut and keeping kosher. But Jesus, so in that way, Jesus is more liberal than what's in the Hebrew Bible. But in this case, what Jesus is doing is he is being more strict than what's in the Hebrew Bible. He is reading Deuteronomy the way Philo and Josephus are reading Deuteronomy, which is to say divorce for any reason. And Jesus is saying, no, we should be more strict about divorce. And it should only be for unchastity or, I guess, adultery. So I think it's just, and also this is what I learned as the major reason. This kind of thinking is a major reason, let me state it that way, that Judaism doesn't accept Jesus as a prophet. The role of the prophets is to quote God. Jesus is going beyond that. He is saying, others have told you, I mean, and you know, what we just read down in the footnote, X, Y, and Z, but I tell you, you know, even more strict. So Jesus goes beyond what's in the Bible. Of course, what Jesus is doing there is being very rabbinic. He's starting with the Bible and then giving his own interpretation. And a lot, Amy Jill Levine, who's quoted in the footnote, wrote a wonderful book called the Jewish Annotated New Testament. And what she describes is what's going on, certainly in Jesus, is very rabbinic. He's basically starting with the Hebrew Bible and giving his own take on the Hebrew Bible. And then it is, of course, Paul and others that make a completely new religion out of it. Okay, Jay.
Yeah, I find this very interesting that everything we've read so far has been the man divorcing the woman. How come they don't have the woman divorcing the man?
Because fundamentally it's a patriarchal system, and in essence, under Jewish law, the woman is the property of the husband, a property with certain guarantees about supporting her and actually meeting her needs and actually even meeting her sexual needs. But fundamentally, when a woman is young, she is under the dominion and the control of her father. And when she gets married, she becomes under the dominion. Now I'm talking about biblical and rabbinic law. She becomes under the dominion and control of her husband. And if he dies, if she becomes a widow, there's a lot of reference in the Bible about protecting widows and orphans, but a divorced woman is in a very difficult spot under Jewish law. Now, what she has is, and this article I don't think really gets into it, are the specific. I think it's mentioned is the husband has specific obligations under the ketubah as to what he has to provide to his wife, and even a divorce settlement. A traditional ketubah is a prenuptial agreement as to how much money he will pay her if he divorces her, and actually even gives her a security lien in his assets. That's why you never see a translation of a traditional ketubah, on the wall, because everybody would be horrified if they saw what they were actually signing. And some of my colleagues, it's interesting that on the chat room on Facebook for Reform rabbis, there was one woman who actually it's not relevant that it's a woman rabbi, but it was a woman rabbi, and she wrote in a panic. She was at the wedding that she had conducted or was in the process of conducting, and the couple never told her that it was a traditional ketubah. And because the ketubah is actually very misogynistic, it's very male centered, and she felt like she could not sign the ketubah, or she could not permit the ketubah to be signed at the wedding. And a lot of the rabbis were just first of all, she didn't know how to fill it out. It was one of these, maybe like Cheryl identified with the get. It was sometimes people buy a ketubah, and this has happened to me as a rabbi. They go to a Judaica store and they're thumbing through. It's like artwork. They're thumbing through, documents, and they find one that's beautiful and it all looks like Hebrew. They have no idea what it says, and it might well be a traditional ketubah, which is written in Aramaic, and it's very complicated to fill out. I mean, it takes me from an hour to an hour and a half to have all the correct things, because it's different whether she is, first time married, remarried, divorced, widowed, the status of her father living, her father not living. There's all kinds of, if it's this, you write in this. If it's, if it's another thing, you fill it in this way. So it's very complicated. So A, she didn't know how to fill it in, which was a problem for her. And B, she was very upset with the idea that they were using a traditional ketubah at all, since it is so misogynistic. And some of us sent her pages. One of the many books I have behind me is a Conservative Rabbi's Manual, which is a handy dandy how to fill in ketubahs of all kinds, including very traditional ketubahs written in Aramaic. Bryce.
The forbearance of Jewish women must be legion. It surprises me that there aren't more poisonings. That's all. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
Or what?
More poisonings. I will not take that concept seriously. Although that may actually surprise Bryce. That I don't know. Okay, Mishnah, debating the grounds for divorce. Henry, you're doing a great job.
Okay. The Mishnah, debating the grounds for divorce. While these earlier sources all understand Deuteronomy 24 as allowing a man to divorce his wife for any reason, the Mishnah, Gittin 9:10, records a dispute on this point based on the motivation given in verse 1. She fails to keep him because he finds something obnoxious. ervat davar,
Mhm.
about her.
So big
Beit,
surprise. The rabbis are going to disagree. Shocking.
we got Beit Shammai, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Beit Shammai suggests that a man may divorce his wife only if she has committed a sexual transgression, apparently adultery. Beit Shammai say a man must not divorce his wife unless he finds that she has done a matter of erva, as it says, because he finds ervat davar about her.
And I can't control my curiosity to look at number 7. Oh, he's paraphrasing ervat davar as davar erva, a matter of erva. Okay. That wasn't so illuminating. Okay. So Shammai. Yeah, continue.
Okay. Shammai focuses on the term erva, which literally means nakedness. In rabbinic parlance, erva refers to a forbidden sexual relationship, a usage that derives from the biblical expressions to uncover nakedness, which describes sexual transgression in Leviticus 18 and 20. This is the same position taken by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, except whereas Jesus presents it as more stringent than the Torah law, Beit Shammai is presenting as reflecting the Torah law. Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel also derived their interpretation from the phrase, because he finds ervat davar about her. However, they focus on the term davar, thing, or something. Beit Hillel say, even if she burns his food, as it says, because he finds ervat davar about her.
So this is kind of classic rabbinics. If you haven't been reading Talmud with us or paying attention, we start with the same text in the Bible and different schools, and these are actually very early, and they're always disagreeing with each other, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Okay, Alan, yeah. You're muted, Alan.
All right. Just observe that the verses in Leviticus 18 and 19 are actually the verses of this week's
Yes,
portion.
that is true. Yep. And it is also interesting that in the traditional Yom Kippur, I think it's the Yom Kippur Torah reading, they are the traditional Torah portion, and they deal with forbidden sexual relationships, and it is particularly painful because one of the things they're going to forbid is homosexuality. So I've often in my discussions and conversations with particularly gay men, they would always find it particularly painful to hear that every year at Yom Kippur, basically denouncing their nature and their relationship. So the Reform movement changed the Yom Kippur reading away from Leviticus 18. Okay, Rabbi, did we just read Rabbi Akiva? No, we haven't read Akiva. Akiva is a little later.
Okay. Rabbi Akiva takes the most lenient position from the husband's perspective, declaring that a man may divorce his wife for essentially no reason at all.
Oh,
Rabbi Akiva says, even if he finds another more beautiful than she, as it says, she fails to please him. In other words, the husband does not need to have any specific complaint about his wife, even the most trifling one, but can divorce her merely because she is no longer interested in her. He is no longer interested in her, or because he finds someone more attractive. Rabbi Akiva bases this interpretation on the first part of the verse, the phrase, she fails to please him, literally. She does not
and
find favor.
it says im lo timtzachen be'enav, which literally means she fails to find grace in his eyes, which is a Hebrew idiom for pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry, they actually say that. I should read ahead. Yeah, literally, Henry.
Right. She does not find favor beauty in his eyes, a purely subjective criterion.
I'll just say the word chen means grace. Certainly can be interpreted in those ways.
Akiva ignores the second phrase because he finds something obnoxious about it. Most likely, he assumes that this phrase is simply meant as one illustrative example of why a man might divorce his wife, not a prescriptive rule limiting when divorce is permitted.
So for all of you who are really angry at Akiva, I'll just point out that he is tortured to death by the Romans and burned. So,
Mhm.
okay.
Question.
Yeah. Alan, yeah.
So this is reminding me in the following that there are places in the Talmud and maybe in the Bible, but certainly in the Talmud, where there's guidance that never happens, like killing your teenager because the teenager's been not good to his parents.
Mhm.
So could this particular treatment, which we're all having mixed feelings about based on 21st century thinking, is some of the things that we're reading, are they things that have never really happened, that there's
Oh,
no
no,
follow
so
through?
we'll get there. So
Okay,
the
all right.
the issue which you raise, which is an important one, is there are things in the Bible which are so offensive to the rabbis that the rabbis basically prove that God couldn't have possibly meant it.
Right, that was my point.
And
Yeah.
stoning a stubborn and recalcitrant son is one of them, and eye for an eye is another one.
We're carrying lumber on Shabbat like you and I were fixing something in the temple, right? Way back. There
Yeah,
was when we learned about that, we were doing a project on Shabbat. Anyway, it's all right.
actually, I'm reading about a responsum on that, which is also very interesting. But ultimately, it's going to be the rabbis of the Talmud who are going to take into account all of these different rabbinic decisions and come up with what constitutes valid reasons for divorce. Jay.
All right, so going back to that, to the age of when a man could just write a letter or write a release or write something and say, "Oh, we are not here. We are now divorced."
Well, I mean,
That's all there was to it.
so we don't know much about that time except we read in the Bible, and presumably that's what there was to it. So what the rabbis of the Talmud are going to do is they're going to set up a procedure so that it's not just he writes a letter, but it has to be presented to a Beit Din. In other words, she has to be aware of it. It has to meet certain standards, and we're going to see that. And I may, the whole subject of what needs to be in a get is interesting. So
Is that what he is writing? Is a get?
well, in modern Jewish law, a scribe, a sofer, would write the get,
Yes.
not the guy. But it's still true that it is the man who grants the woman a divorce, and he cannot be forced to do it. And I think we're going to get into that in this article. And if we don't, we'll continue this discussion. But it's not balanced. A woman cannot write a get and to the man.
Maybe I'm asking you this the wrong way. A man and a woman are married, and she is a bad cook, and he doesn't like that, like we read a couple paragraphs before. And so he decides to divorce her. So he writes the get, and he gives it to her, and she's got to go pack her luggage and leave the house.
Well, and he has to pay off his ketubah. He's got to pay her the amount of money he's promised her in the ketubah.
Right.
And so the part of the role of the rabbinic court, and we're going to get to what modern, rules are on reasons for divorce, but it's not simply what's in the Bible.
Well, I guess the question I want to know is, well, after he's written the letter and presented it to her, Don't they have to go to some kind of court?
Yes, that's what we were talking about. The Jewish court, 3 rabbis, the Beit Din.
Oh, so she goes to them,
They both go. He has to present it to her
right,
uh,
right.
in front of the 3
Okay,
rabbis of
so
the
they
Beit
go
Din.
there.
Yes,
I mean, it's not one of these things where here's a letter, get the hell out.
right. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Yes.
Yeah,
No, there's a procedure, but
okay,
the procedure is not outlined in the Bible. But at least divorce is mentioned in the Bible, and marriage is not.
but it is mentioned in the Talmud.
Oh yeah, the Talmud, as I mentioned, there's a whole tractate called Gittin about bills of divorce.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
By the
Okay.
way, I think the phrase, Rabbi, is don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you.
I'm not sure I'm happy to hear that, but thank you. So let's get a woman's voice. Cheryl, would you like to read a little bit?
Oh, of course, Rabbi.
Modern scholarship is where we are. If you're
Oh, okay. Ready? Many modern scholars understand Vivat Davar, much like Beit Shammai, as indicating some sort of sexual impropriety, if not outright adultery. Samuel Rolls Driver, for example, writes that the woman is guilty of immodest or indecent behavior, that is, short of actual unchastity. Others, including Jacob Rabinowitz, Ari Tog, and Eckhart Otto, maintain that it refers to adultery.
And remember, the biblical punishment for adultery is death. So that clearly is not an overreach to say it should be a cause for divorce.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
don't I remember the Torah says something about that you have to drink, the woman has to drink some dirty water
No. That's the Sota test. If the husband accuses her of adultery,
yeah,
she can prove her innocence by going through this rather bizarre ritual.
yeah.
Okay. Cheryl, let's continue.
Scholars who take this position frequently cite Beit Shammai as precedent for their understanding. In addition, many Christian scholars read this verse in light of the related passage in Matthew. Driver exemplifies both of these tendencies. He draws on the Mishnah to support his understanding of the law as limiting divorce to cases of sexual impropriety, while also viewing the law as laying the groundwork for Jesus's more expansive teaching.
I'm reminded of that great Jewish commentator Woody Allen, who observed that in New York State, it used to be that the only grounds for divorce was adultery. And so he observed that although adultery is forbidden in the 10 Commandments, under New York State law, it's mandatory for divorce. I thought that's one of my favorite little Woody Allen isms. Okay, let's continue.
Ervat Davar in Deuteronomy 23:15. Many commentators from Beit Shammai onward have understood Ervat Davar in light of the expression to uncover nakedness in Leviticus 18 and 20. However, this is problematic, not only because the two expressions are different, but also because the term Eva may have different connotations in the Holiness collection and the Deuteronomic Law collection. In fact, the term Vat Davar also appears elsewhere in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 23 explains that when making a war camp, it is important to protect the camp from any offensive thing, and specifically lists nocturnal emissions and feces. Thus, any soldier with a nocturnal emission must leave the camp until he has washed himself the next day, and can then return around sunset the next evening, when he will be pure again. Also, anyone who needs to defecate must leave the camp with a shovel, bury his feces outside the camp. The text concludes these regulations as follows. Since Adonai your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you, let your camp be holy. Let him not find anything unseemly or vatavar among you and turn away from you. According to this passage, because God traveled in the Israelite camp, it was important for it to be kept free of impurity or uncleanliness.
And of course, the major point is that that phrase doesn't just refer to sexual unchastity. It can mean other things. Okay.
Connecting the two uses of ervat devar. The connection between semen and excrement and the grounds for divorce in Deuteronomy 24:1 is unclear. Toeg, noting the connection to private parts, sees this verse as supporting his understanding of ervat devar as connoting adultery. Driver, on the other hand, observes that what is described in Deuteronomy 23 is not immoral, but only unbecoming, and sees that as consistent with his view that the woman is guilty of immodest behavior that is not legally prohibited. John Walton, noting the connection to ritual impurity, suggests that the woman suffers from a long-term menstrual irregularity that renders her ritually impure. Driver's observation is salient. Ervat devar here does not seem to connote sinfulness. It does not necessarily even refer to behavior. Walton's suggestion may be in the right category, but it seems too specific. Semen is ritually polluting, but excrement is not. Most likely, ervat devar is a general term for something subjectively repellent. The man has simply discovered something about his wife that he does not like. The second divorce. While the meaning of ervat devar remains somewhat ambiguous, the motivation for the second divorce is described quite straightforwardly. Then this latter man dislikes, rejects her. The root, which means hate in modern Hebrew, is sometimes used in the Bible to describe a man's rejection of his wife or his preference for another, not necessarily for any specific reason. Genesis 29:31-33 state that Leah was rejected or disliked by Jacob. Similarly, Deuteronomy 21:15-17 states that if a man loves one of his wives and rejects or dislikes another, and the disfavored wife bears his firstborn son, he cannot give the preferred wife's son the greater portion of his inheritance. It must go to the firstborn.
Actually, I'm going to interrupt you. I had to read that about 3 times before I understood just exactly what it was saying. So if a man has a favored wife and a disfavored wife, and the disfavored wife has the man's firstborn child, I think, as we know, the firstborn gets a much larger inheritance than the other children.
Yeah, so primogenitor, he gets everything.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think I know in more modern times, sometimes it's half. But anyway, but definitely a favored position. The text is saying that that even though it's from the unfavored wife, the firstborn is the firstborn, irrespective of which wife that child comes from. At first,
You
I thought
think
it
that's
was
because of Hagar and Ishmael?
What happened?
no, that would actually be counter, because Hagar, and it's not clear whether she is considered a full wife of Abraham, but
Oh,
Abraham's firstborn is
man.
Ishmael,
Right,
and clearly the covenant continues through Isaac, not Ishmael.
right.
Second-born children in Genesis seem to make out well, which is a whole other interesting subject.
Rabbi, our viewing is kind of messed up. It says we are viewing Alan's whiteboard. We're not
Yep.
viewing the article anymore.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Wait a minute. Let's see if I might have touched something, but I also wasn't seeing the screen share either.
Okay, so
And
I'm
so
gonna.
it looks like Alan's
Yeah, I think
sharing
Alan,
not.
you've hijacked the.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, I got it. I see what happened. I hit the
There
time
you-
share.
There we
It's stop
go.
share, sorry. Oh, I
Okay,
touched the wrong thing.
So, are we still screen sharing or not?
Yes.
well,
Okay, so
now
you
we
can.
see the gallery. We don't see your article.
Okay, so hang on. I'm gonna see if I can fix
And I have a
this.
question while
Hold
you
on
do
one
that.
second. Let me see
All
if
right,
I can
sure,
fix this.
okay.
Okay, now you should be seeing the article. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I have a question. The reference that that Cheryl read that references in Genesis about Jacob and Leah, that doesn't lead to a divorce, so I'm not sure why that's relevant to this discussion.
No,
to
no,
that
no.
statement.
What they're talking about is in the second divorce, it says a reason for the divorce is sana'a, which is a term which means dislikes or rejects. And one example of that is that Jacob dislike or is said to use that term, sunu'ah, for describing his feelings for Leah. It doesn't result in a divorce, but they're just pointing out other places where that Hebrew word is used.
Oh, okay, I get that. Thank you.
Okay, let me see how much we got. And we'll read one more little section, and then we'll continue next time. Okay, Cheryl, Westbrook.
I didn't read the last line about being
Oh,
a
sorry.
virgin.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Finally, Deuteronomy 22:13-19 describes a case in which a man marries a woman and decides that he dislikes her and falsely accuses her of not being a virgin. All of these cases reflect subjective dislike. Westbrook, 2 reasons for divorce. Raymond Westbrook, the late scholar of ancient Near Eastern law, suggests that the 2 cases in Deuteronomy 24 present 2 different scenarios. The first divorce in Deuteronomy 24 has objective grounds, though not necessarily sexual impropriety, while the second divorce has no objective or legal grounds. He connects the first case to the laws of Hammurabi. If the wife of a man accumulates a private hoard, scatters her household, slanders her husband, he may divorce her without giving her anything, not her journey money, not her divorce money. But even if Westbrook is correct in understanding Arvat Davar as referring to this type of substantive misbehavior, the fact remains that the text also describes as its second case a divorce without grounds. This indicates that in Israelite society, a man could divorce his wife simply because he disliked her.
Okay, I think it's a little, well, it's just about 8 o'clock, and rather than, yeah, there's some substantive stuff in the article. So we'll finish up the article next time, and I'm also going to circulate some material on what a get is, what the divorce document is, and I think actually this article talks about, no, it really doesn't. Yeah, this article. So, and also, the Orthodox, conservative, and reform approaches to Gittin, to gets, to documents of divorce. And then the other subject, which is interesting, if for no other reason that it's widely misunderstood, is what is a mamzer? Mamzer is not a nice thing, for those of you who know Yiddish or Hebrew.
Yep.
And it's often translated as a bastard. But
Right.
in Jewish law, it is very different than what English law describes as a, whoops, let me just get back to the right place so I'll know it. It's very different than what in English law is described as a bastard. And I'll just mention here, and I think I even have this in, boy, I don't know if you can.
Is it a child of a sota?
No.
Okay.
But we'll discuss it next time. And the other thing I will mention is, as we discuss documents of divorce, that generally in Orthodox and conservative Judaism, the attitude and approach is, if a marriage is created by a Jewish ceremony and a Jewish document, namely a ketubah, if the marriage is to be terminated, we should also have a Jewish ceremony and a Jewish document. The Reform Judaism took the approach, which is that we basically submit to the civil law on subjects of marriage and divorce. In the United States, civil law prescribes that a religious officiant can conduct a marriage. So when I conduct a marriage, it is both under Jewish law and under California law, or Utah law. I've done, I think, one out-of-state marriage. But in Judaism, there is no, I'm sorry, in Reform Judaism, as we will see, there is no reform get per se. And that's sort of an interesting subject. And there is a document of separation for couples who feel like they want something written and Jewishly ceremonial. I've only had the occasion to do that once for a couple, actually for a woman whose divorce had taken place years ago. She wanted something more ritualistic. Alan.
I don't know if you want the story, Alan, Michael, you probably remember Rabbi Alan Greenbaum's story about how he conducted a Jewish marriage without following California civil law. Do you remember that story?
No, I don't remember the story. It actually comes up more often than you think.
Okay, well, I could quickly tell it, or if you're out of time, I don't need to tell it.
No, I'm fine. I mean, people
Okay,
feel like
so
they need
Alan
to leave,
tells
they can
the story after he'd conducted this Jewish wedding, is that he had met this couple in a nursing home in Ventura, I'm going to say, but I'm not sure where it was. And he learned from this couple that his proprietary that runs a nursing home requires they be married in order to live in the same unit. And they didn't want to be they didn't want to be married because under their benefits, federal and state or some other benefits, if they're married, they would collectively make less income.
Right.
And so faced with that, Rabbi Greenbaum, knowing he's violating the California law, don't turn him in, please, anybody here.
Well, you're the one who's doing it, actually, Alan.
What? I'm turning him in. I'm not reporting it.
You could have
He
said
thought
a
about
rabbi,
it as he tells it in his dry humor. He says he gave a lot of thought to this for about 5 or 10 seconds. And of course, he conducted the Jewish wedding and didn't file it as a civil wedding.
Yeah. So my attitude on that actually is slightly different. I have conducted Jewish weddings. It's actually not at all uncommon. In fact, I'm going to be doing one in about a month where the couple is already married under civil law. And we're not going to have another civil marriage. I'm not going to have another California marriage license. So I will conduct a Jewish ceremony alone. I'm not even sure that violates any law.
No, it probably does not. Probably does not.
I've learned never to use the word probably when it comes to legal matters, but I agree with you. Occasionally, I will conduct a civil wedding without a Jewish wedding. And that is sometimes for often, well, the few times I can think of it is a couple where one party, I think in every case, 2 or 3 cases, in the military, and if they're married, they can get married housing and they have other rights. So it's to their advantage to be married. So I will conduct a brief civil ceremony to do that. And then typically later when they gather the family, they will have a Jewish wedding. If the purpose of not filing a civil license is fraud, which is to say they want to defraud the Department of Social Security to continue Social Security payments as if the two were unmarried, even though they are married. So the purpose of not having a civil wedding is fraud. That's not something I will do. No. And I actually had a very similar case of a couple that was in a board and care facility, and it was exactly the same thing. They wanted to share a room, and they couldn't unless they were legally married, because of the rules and regulations of the proprietor of this place. And I did not do that. There were some other issues there as well, because there was a real question of mental competence and whether it was a good idea for them to actually be married. Erwin.
When I was married in Montreal, Quebec in 1960, there was no such a thing as a civil marriage certificate. So I had only a ketubah from the temple.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was when I came to the United States and I went to the consulate, they didn't accept the ketubah. So I had to find a notary who was able to read Hebrew and translate the ketubah to the immigration services.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. I think Sonia went through the same thing. And in her case, it's much more difficult because, the ketubah would have been written in Judeo-Aramaic or even Judeo-Arabic, which is unique to Morocco. And the script, if you know what this is Rashi script and Arabic script. So basically you need a certified, someone who will certify a translation. And that's actually quite common. And it's also quite common in other countries. I don't know about Canada, but in Europe, they don't accept religious ceremonies as legally binding. So it's quite common in Europe that, I attended a wedding in Paris last summer. So the couple had to have a civil wedding, and then, a few days later, they had their Jewish wedding. So yeah, marriage law is interesting. Okay, well, thank you for coming. I will send out an email probably tonight. Oh, I got to keep an eye on time. I have got another appointment. Probably tonight or tomorrow with not only the video, but also, some other material that we're going to take a look at. So take care and good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night, Rabbi.